Bookish podcast, hosted by Emma Saylor, is a unique look at all things literature and is your radio book club. Read along as Emma takes us through discussions of her books of the month, and you can chime in and give your feedback as well. Tune in Tuesdays at 3:30 p.m., only on the Oracle Talk Radio Network. The Chasing Prophecy radio show, where we discuss everything and anything beyond the scope of normal. Hosted by Jenny Nicasio and Tom Conway, Chasing Prophecy is your premier destination for all things paranormal. Tune in Thursdays at 8 p.m., only on the Oracle Talk Radio Network.
Welcome into another exciting episode of Pete vs. Anxiety, the mental health podcast, breaking the stigma that mental health can be discussed. My guest this week has a very interesting story. Please meet Heidi. She is an actual Columbine survivor. Heidi, why don't you say hi to everybody?
Hi, everybody. Wonderful to be here and be able to share my story with you.
When I saw your sheet, I'm not going to lie, my jaw hit the floor. I was like, wow. So that I just got to say, that's probably the craziest response I've ever gotten.
Really?
I mean, I knew you had said something, but I was like, damn.
Yeah. I mean, what happened at Columbine is so notorious and I think etched in American even history. And so I could see where it would be kind of shocking to receive a message from me.
Right, because I was like, damn, she was in there. Like, I knew
Yeah.
your message was, oh, well, I have a story similar. I was like, whoa, I didn't realize it was that similar. I'm like, damn,
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
take us back to that day. What was
Sure.
it like?
I mean, honestly, starting at the very beginning of the day, it was a normal day. April, springtime. It was nice outside. I was looking forward to later that day because I was going to be doing cheerleading tryouts. And so I had practiced all night and was just kind of anxious about that lead up, but went to my morning classes. And decided to go to the library during my lunch hour. The Columbine Library, too, is just beautiful. And so there's glass windows that overlook the mountains. And I sat down at a table that faced the mountains and, kind of soaked it all in. I'm a Colorado native, but still, I mean, even to this day, I never get tired of the mountains. And so I looked out as I pulled out my homework and just began working with trying to get everything done, knowing that I had these cheerleading tryouts later that day. I was working on like vocabulary and math. And shortly into the period, I started hearing these loud bangs start going off. It sounded like it could have been construction. It sounded, that's what I think my first inclination is they're working on something outside of the school. And so I really brushed it off and just was like, this isn't anything to be concerned about. And so kept working and kept hearing these bangs. And they felt right outside of the library. So the library has an exit that leads to the outer part of the school. And so it was right there that these bangs were going off. And continued to work on my homework. Started because it was so persistent, started to question what they were, started to wonder, what's happening. And then it all came to a head really when, the bangs continued and a teacher came running and rushing, full of just absolute panic into the library. And she just kept yelling that a kid had been shot. And she was frantic. I remember her face just being incredibly pale. And she yelled at all of us, get under your tables, get under your tables. And I watched, from where I was positioned in the library, I could really see the entrance and could see a lot of these things happening. And so I saw her basically disappear behind the main desk at the front. And I hear her on the phone with 911 and she's telling them what happened. At this point, the chaos just increases. And the bangs are going off, but they're different bangs, and it's starting to flood the library with smoke. And so there's just this haze that comes over the entire library. The fire alarms start going off, the lights kick off. And so it's just this almost hazy, dark environment, full of smoke, with all of this sound just reverberating. And I remember I looked over, so I'm under my table. I forgot to mention that I had listened to the teacher, got under my table. I pulled all of the chairs as close to my body as I possibly could, still not sure what was happening, but it definitely was feeling like something serious. And I remember I looked over to the right and I could see the entrance to the library. And I just saw these two figures enter the library. And from what I could make out, they were wearing trench coats. I could see that one of them had artillery strapped to his shoulder, and they were carrying guns. And the very first thing that they said, and they just entered the library with force, confidence, and they announced to all of us, "Get ready to die," basically. And from that point, I just heard them start firing, and students start screaming, and people saying things like, "I can't believe that you shot him. I can't believe that you shot him." And so I was in the third section of the library. They started in the first, and each section was separated by books. And so um, they came over to my section, and I could see their boots as they passed by. And I
That
walked,
not to cut you off there for a second,
yeah,
that they were that close?
yes, yep.
Jesus.
Yep. So I'm watching, I mentioned that I had pulled all of the chairs around my body. I could see their boots. And they began shooting all across my section. And so there were computer cubbies directly in front of me. They put their gun under the computer cubby and pulled the trigger. And I just remember watching, I now know who it was, but I watched as his body just slumped over, after they pulled the trigger. Um, and I could see the shotgun shells from their gun, falling to the ground as they were firing. And they basically, continued to shoot at whomever they possibly could. They were saying awful, obscene, horrific things that I don't really want to repeat. Um, you
No, I
know,
get that completely.
yeah,
That's just insane.
yes. Making fun of kids as they shot them, racist, awful remarks, going after specifically jocks and people who are wearing a white hat, which they felt denoted jocks. They were telling us, "Stand up. If you want to live, stand up." And I'm like, there's no way in hell I'm going to stand up.
Yeah, you start
Um,
shooting people, there's no way in
yeah,
hell I'm
no,
standing
I'm
up
not
either,
dumb.
forget
I'm
that.
not dumb. Yeah. So they continued to do this for a while. It felt like a lifetime. All told, they were in the library for 8 minutes. Those 8 minutes felt like an eternity to me. And as I'm sitting there under my table, it's almost like, and they say it sounds super cliche, but as someone who has lived this, I can say that it's true, is your life flashes before your eyes and you
Oh,
start
yeah.
to see, like almost like a picture book, your friends, your family, your pets, going through your life, or through your mind, and you just start thinking, I will never see these things again. I will never see these people again. And your body almost starts preparing itself in this state of shock, to die in a lot of ways. And so I fully believed in that moment that that's what was going to happen to me. And it was, very close to being the case. And so at one point, they came over to my table and they looked underneath, and I had almost, from what I remember, made eye contact with one of the shooters. And when I looked at his eyes, they were glazed over. And I mean, more detail, but he had, in the chaos, shot his own nose. And so his face was bloody and his eyes were glazed over. And they left the library soon after that, but they had a conversation where we're listening to all of this. It was maybe just a few feet from my table, but they were saying things like, um, let's go take care of the bomb downstairs. And so there was a big propane tank bomb that they had planted in the cafeteria, which was directly under the library, that was set to detonate and hadn't yet. And so they're like, let's go set that off. And they were telling us, don't worry, you guys are going to be dead soon. You guys are going to burn. Um, you know, and I just remember thinking in that moment, I just want them out of here. I just want them out of here. No matter what that means for me as far as my life is concerned, I just want them out of this library. And so I watched as after they had this conversation, they left and I could see them leave again because of where my table was. And I waited a few breaths, a few moments, and got up. I don't know how or where I found the strength to do
Oh,
that,
I
but I
wouldn't I wouldn't have got up,
did.
honestly. I'll be honest with you right now. I think I would shit myself quite literally. As vulgar as that sounds, I think I quite would have. I mean, I've been robbed at gunpoint before,
Mm.
so I kind of
Yeah,
get that,
wow.
things flashing before your eyes. Like I had the
Yes.
gun against my temple and my chest, but God,
Wow.
nothing like that. That just sounds crazy. And I don't remember though them ever
Mm.
mentioning that they had a bomb underneath the library either when the news reports
Yeah.
came out, which is kind of funny because they leave out little details like that.
Sure,
So the
sure.
fact that you're basically telling people that is even better
Yeah.
because people don't know those kind of details.
Yes. Yep. No, their original plan was for these bombs, and, we had, post Columbine, I had actually met someone that was on the bomb squad, and he said that there was just a couple wires that were crossed, and if they had not been crossed, those bombs would have gone off, and their original plan was, "We're gonna blow up the cafeteria, it's gonna blow up the library or parts of it, and then we're going to shoot kids as they exit this burning building." That was their original plan. And so when
Jesus.
those bombs didn't go off, that's when they entered the school and started carrying out a different form of their plan.
That's insane. Like that's I don't even know
Yep.
what to say. Like I'm over here listening to this and I'm just having
Yeah.
chills coming up my spine, man. Like I
Mm,
could feel like I'm there.
mm. Yeah.
Like that's crazy.
Yeah. It
Oh my
was
god.
crazy.
I'm so
Yeah.
sorry. I'm so sorry.
Yeah.
Jesus. Wow.
Yeah.
Man,
I mean,
talk
but like I
about being
look back
in this shit.
25 years. I have had 25 years of getting to be alive.
Yeah.
I mean,
And
what a gift I have.
did you experience nightmares after that too? Because when I got robbed, I know that
Yeah.
I had experienced like night terrors and things like that.
Yep.
Like it kept
Yep.
replaying it in my head, and God, that's horrible.
Yes. No, there it was it was and it still is a journey of healing,
Oh, I
going
believe it.
through something like that, and I think that mental health, I'm so glad, has come so much further than it was when I went through this event. When I went through the event, it was almost like white knuckle through your emotions.
Yeah,
Not, I didn't maybe have the space to process like I should have, and I am fortunate to have found good therapy, even medication when I needed it at times. Post all of that, and to be able, as I said, to be standing here today and just even in talking to you, be reminded of the gift that I received that several of my fellow students didn't.
rest in peace, guys. That was terrible.
Yeah,
I'm sorry. That is just
yeah,
that's insane.
yeah.
Like it's crazy what you see on the news versus someone actually being there
Mm,
firsthand encounters of these kind of things going on. And
yeah.
I know that when I got robbed, it was a lot of people who went, "Oh, well, and if I was in that situation,
Yes.
listen, you weren't in that situation.
Yes.
From what
Yeah.
you're telling me, they were
Yep.
steps away from you."
Yeah.
God,
Yeah. And you don't know how you're going to react and respond in those situations until you're in them, right? I would
exactly.
have never
See,
known.
so now somebody else understands exactly what I'm talking about. Like your situation worse than
Mm,
mine, but you get the idea because that's
yeah.
what I experienced too. And I tell
Yeah.
people that I'm like, and I teach people that nowadays where I
Mm,
work now. I'm like, hey, listen. you always had to suspect that everybody there, you don't know what they're up to next, and this
Yeah.
is why I'm so harsh about certain things because
Yeah.
it's like I've been through this.
Yeah.
Some of y'all will not come back from this.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's crazy. I mean, it really
Yeah.
is. It's like it was the first big tragedy in America with
Mm.
with schools and everything
Yeah.
else, and then
Yeah.
nowadays we've got it going off left and right, and
Yes.
it's just insane.
Yeah. Absolutely. And that I think is maybe one of the hardest things to reconcile with post Columbine is, as you mentioned, when it happened, it was such a shock on our national consciousness. Like, we couldn't believe that this country was capable of doing something like this, or this happening in our country. And now that we're known for this to happen is just, I think, one of the biggest tragedies that there is. And I hate that we haven't been able to figure out this problem. I hate that I continue to see these things continue to happen on a regular basis. And it can sometimes be obviously re traumatizing for me, having gone through that. But I think that, having lived now several years post, is I always think of the victims and the people who experienced this, and just the brokenness that these traumas and tragedies cause, with people being at the absolute epicenter who experience these things firsthand and lose people firsthand, but even just on a national level, and what that does to us from just a large scale, and what we have to grapple with and cope and make almost normal to survive on a day-to-day basis, is, I think, just truly tragic, that this is something that we continue to have to experience on a regular basis.
No, I agree completely. It's sickening, honestly, because I know the most recent one that went in Georgia. The dad bought the kid the gun and gave it to
Yes.
him, knowing what his intentions were.
Yeah.
And then he wants to act like he doesn't know what's going on. It's like you knew what your son's intentions were. You bought
Yeah.
this gun for him.
Yeah.
And it's crazy because everyone wants to blame guns, but it's not the gun, it's the person operating the gun. The gun is an inanimate
Mhm.
object, it can't do it itself.
Yeah.
I think that's a lot of things people miss is that the gun has to be fired for it to do something. It didn't accidentally go off, and you see it
Yeah.
in so different forms, like the one where the one military guy went on the base and was shooting everybody there, and
Yeah.
and at this point you figure, like you said, it would be a red flag to somebody start doing something when the whole
Mm.
situation happened, but we haven't. We don't do that for some reason,
Mm.
and we all act like it's all okay, or we blame mental health right out the bat. Well, a lot of
Yeah.
times it is mental health's fault, though. I do notice a
Yeah.
lot of people go that direction, though. They're like, oh, it's
Yeah.
automatically something mental health. Do we know for
Yeah.
sure? Have we give these people psych evaluations to make sure that's not
Yeah.
the case, or maybe that was their true intentions from the beginning? It's
Yeah.
crazy.
Well, and I think, I mean, and not to get into a political discussion about it, because I know that the focus of your talk is more trauma and anxiety, but I do think that if you compare our country with our peer countries, who, by all indicators and markers have the same mental health challenges, that they don't have these mass shootings like we do. And
Yeah.
so, I think that there are no easy answers. I think that it is something, though, that I will want to see us really work to solve as a country. From a bipartisan standpoint, what can we do practically to solve this? I hate the fact that last week I got an email from my son's school telling me that he had an active shooter drill. I hate that I have to talk to my kid about what that might look like, and that he
Yeah.
has to practice
Now, does your son
for
know
that.
the whole story? I'm not sure how old he is.
He's 10, and
Oh,
no,
yeah. He's still
I
probably too young to know
yeah.
the whole story right now. Yeah,
I
definitely.
Yeah, I mean, he knows, high level, right? He knows high level what I went through, because that's part of my story, and, it's part of who I am, but I'm definitely not gonna, um I'm concerned about traumatizing him in
Yeah,
any way.
definitely.
So I don't want him, being scared for his experience at school, or even being scared for having heard what I went through.
No, I remember the guys in the news report they were saying were bullied. Do you feel we've progressed in helping or stopping bullying or anything like that?
Yeah, and that was, something that did come out, as well, and Columbine, even I had experiences where it just from an emotional, mental, standpoint, did not feel safe. And it didn't feel like there were mechanisms in place to keep kids safe. I had some things happen to me with certain other students that prior to the shooting that made me feel unsafe, made me feel bullied. And so I know that that was a part of the shooter story as well, that they definitely felt, you know, like other students were uh, being mean to them on a regular and consistent basis. And I can't speak to them and if that's the main reason why this happened, but I do think it definitely did not help.
Yeah, when it comes to bullying, it's tough because a lot of kids think it's fun to pick on other kids, but don't realize
Yeah,
the mental aspect of what they're doing.
right.
Do you think we should probably have a law against bullying? I personally think we should. I think we
Hmm.
should have something in place for this kind of thing. I feel like the schools don't do enough these days because I know my daughter herself had dealt
Yeah,
with bullying before with another
yeah.
kid, and it was insane the level
Hmm.
of things that were going on and things he was doing. And it's like I don't think people
Hmm.
realize like
Yeah,
when you're picking on somebody like that, the mental effects you're having on that person either.
yeah, yeah. I mean, I haven't really thought about that, so I don't know that I have an opinion one way. I'd like to process through that first,
Yeah, no problem.
um, all of that. But I do think that as much as we can create safe spaces for our children, the better. Whether that's emotionally and mentally safe, or in the case of school shootings, physically safe. I'm for what creates those types of environments.
Yeah, yeah, I get that. That's just as crazy though. And especially when you hear it nowadays, I
Yeah.
could just not even imagine the thoughts that go through your head when you hear those things going on, especially with your own children. And
Yes.
it's just insane.
Yes. Yeah. Absolutely. Especially as we have talked that, uh, and I think that anyone in the United States can understand is that there's a certain randomness to mass shootings. There's a certain it could happen anywhere feeling. Uh, and I think that, you know, we have maybe grown numb to that being the reality in a lot of ways because it's happened so many times. It's almost like car accidents, which happen on such a frequent and regular basis, is that's been the case for mass shootings. And so they're almost just because they're so regular for us, I think that we have just almost accepted it as part of reality, um, and accepted that it can truly happen almost anywhere at this point, which is terrifying, especially when you have children.
And speaking of children, I know here in Texas, the schools have given the teachers the power to carry guns.
Hmm.
Are you for or against that idea? I mean, I know a lot of people are for it because of the fact that there's basically signs that say that if they enter the
Hmm.
premise unwanted, that they will be told to shoot to kill. Basically, essentially, is what the signs are
Yeah.
saying outside the building and things like that. I know a lot of
Yeah.
people, call for these things. Now,
Yeah.
I'm not sure how you feel about it though.
Yeah. Well, and I think again, and again, no easy answers, right?
Definitely.
um, I I do worry about using more guns to solve a gun issue. I think one of the things when looking at us, the United States, versus our peer countries, places like Australia, New Zealand, parts of Europe that don't have this problem, who have maybe had a mass shooting and have adjusted things within their laws and legal structures that have prevented more shootings from happening. I worry about the fact that statistically there are more guns in our country than people, and that there's just such, and then you had mentioned about how this father had purchased the gun for this child in Atlanta, or this kid in Atlanta that
Yeah.
committed the most recent shooting, is just this weapon that is meant for one and one thing only, to kill other people, is so accessible in our country. And um, I think that, again, no easy answers, and it's not just this broad stroke. I'm not proposing we take away the guns by
No, I get
any
that
means at
completely.
all. But I do think we need to look mindfully and soberly at maybe how our culture and love for this particular weapon is maybe causing some harm. And I'm not for abolishing any, Second Amendment or anything like that, but I do think that we need to look at things realistically, and just be willing to come to the table with potential for change. Um, and it not be these huge fear mongering extremes, to make any type of progress in one way or the other.
Right. And I mean that's the thing too. It's kind of crazy because whole statistic with guns and things like that. And I
Mm,
know people are making a big deal about AR-15s and things like
yeah.
that. And I'm like, why do you need an assault rifle like that?
Yes.
I mean, I
Yes.
could see doomsday preppers doing something like that, kind of, because they're planning for worst case
Yeah,
scenario
absolutely.
and all that crazy stuff. We've all
Yep.
seen that TV show where they start doing these wild, obscene things and doing these like,
Yep.
oh, I'm preparing for the zombie apocalypse. Really?
Yes.
When is that going to happen?
Yep. Yep. I
And
know.
it's nuts. It's just
Yes.
it's like, "What?"
Yep.
And you can't
Yeah.
help but laugh because you're like, "What?"
Yeah.
Like, you wanna understand what these people are thinking, at the same
Yes.
time, it's like, "Okay, I think we're getting a little
Okay.
extreme here with this, let's
Totally.
calm down a bit here."
Yep. Yep.
And it's just like, "Oh god, help me
Yeah.
out."
Yes.
That's crazy.
Yep.
So, I
Yeah.
know in your guest sheet, it says that you had wrote a book. What is your book called?
It's called Silence Shattered. I wrote it when I was 18. So I have changed so much since I wrote that book. I will say, I was very, from just even a religious standpoint, very much more religious. Uh, when I was in high school, I'm not so much now. I more spiritual. And so there are themes in my book, all to say, that I would say I don't subscribe to anymore. But I
Well,
was
yeah,
18. It was
if you wrote it at
raw.
18, it makes sense. So, the maturity level is different
Yeah.
versus now. So, you're
Yep.
getting the real hand perspective of someone at that age and that time,
Yes.
versus now your opinions have changed obviously a
Yeah.
little bit.
Yep.
You don't feel the same way.
Yep. Yeah. And I mean, I think that healing from trauma does that too. I mean, you can't heal and not grow and not develop new opinions and not evolve. And I am, 25 years later, not the same person that was under that library table. In a lot of ways, I am. My core is probably very similar, but as far as beliefs and all of that, I'm a different person.
Yeah, yeah, and I get
Yeah,
that. And that's, I get it because at the time, a lot of people I'm sure had a lot of questions for you since you were literally there and you were
yeah,
steps away from and this whole scenario went down.
yeah.
And versus now what your opinions are looking back on it, obviously have matured differently, obviously based on things and
Hmm.
how they've gone and different life
Yeah,
experiences
yeah,
and,
yeah.
and stuff like that.
Absolutely. I mean, I would say that I really didn't get to be a teenager. I didn't have those formative um, years of, you know, as being a dumb teenager, making dumb mistakes as a dumb teenager.
Right.
I
Yeah.
had to grow up super fast. And post Columbine, I traveled and I spoke and I shared my story. And I think that, there was a lot that was happening. My dad was at that time also dying from cancer.
Nice.
He would ultimately pass away when I was 17. So I went, the shooting happened at age 15. And then by 17, my father had passed away. And so I had just had to grow up really, really fast. Ended up getting married very young as a result of it. Just made decisions that I would say were not within the long-term orientation in mind, because I had had these major events happen at such a young age that I almost had a mentality of, I don't see myself living much longer. I mean, it wasn't like this um, desire to die or
Yeah,
anything
yeah,
like
okay, I
that.
get
It was
that.
more of just a belief that I had, because I had watched my dad pass away in his early 40s. I
Yeah,
had went through Columbine, that it was almost like this sense for life isn't going to last very long for me. And I think having healed through a lot of that, I, have a more long term approach to life now, instead of a short term approach, if that makes sense.
yeah,
So,
yeah, that makes perfect sense.
yeah.
In the Know with Jenny Nicasio, your home for pop culture and trending topics from all over the United States. All with commentary from your favorite host, Jenny Nicasio. Tune in Wednesdays at 11 a.m. Eastern, only on the Oracle Talk Radio Network. The Mystic Whispers podcast, hosted by the psychic seer herself, Nicole Gaspard. Each week, Nicole shares her experiences and views, as well as interviews guests. Tune in Wednesdays at 10 p.m. Eastern, 7 p.m. Pacific, only on the Oracle Talk Radio Network.
So fast forward to where we're at now currently. I know
Yeah,
you list that you have an MBA and a master's.
I do. Yeah, I ended up
What
getting.
led you on that path?
Yeah. I mean, honestly, I'm a nerd. I love school. I love it so much. I would be back in school today if I could, and if it didn't cost an arm and a leg. I love being in a classroom. I love having thoughtful conversations. And so that is a core of who I am. But I ended up getting an MBA in international business, and was able to do some, I would say, some key trips that took me around the world, and allowed me to do global nonprofit work. I ended up going into global nonprofit work shortly after getting my MBA, where we had programs in sub Saharan Africa and Southeast Asia, addressing things like high infant mortality rates and young children growing up in the sex industries, um, suffering from exploitation and abuse, and working to provide protection for them. Uh, that eventually led me to wanting to get another master's degree, and I did that. It's called a master's in development practice, which really focuses on how do we build programs in other countries and do that well and in a way that's going to bring impact and not harm. And so right now I'm working for an organization, wonderful organization, Healing Waters. We actually build revolutionary, I mean, and when I say we, I'm including myself in that, but it's really our field staff and our engineers who are doing this.
Well, you're
They're
part of it
building.
as well. I mean, it does
I'm
take.
a small part of it.
Listen,
But
every cog matters. Okay, listen, every cog
thank you
matters.
for
No
that.
matter
I
what little part
appreciate
you do,
it.
and how little you feel you do, I
Yeah.
guarantee they respect the fact that you're out there in a third world
Yeah.
country of some sort trying to help
Mhm.
out, and I'm sure it's a
Mhm.
lot different versus being here. And a
Yeah.
lot of people don't realize that a
Yeah.
lot of this stuff is going on, and no one, if it wasn't for people like you, we'd never even know half these things were going on. Honestly,
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, and it is something that, I mean, there are 2 billion people in the world that don't have access to safe water, or consistent access to safe water. And you think about what that would mean. I mean, if you really stop and think about what that would
I
mean
think
to
a lot of
not
people take
have
a lot of
that.
things today for
Totally.
granted.
Absolutely.
Like the internet is,
Yep.
everything else. Like some of these kids nowadays, like they don't realize like we didn't have these things before.
Yes.
Like all that kind of stuff, and
Yep.
the video games and everything else. Like we grew up with
Yep.
stuff totally different back in the day. Like
Yes.
Windows was a new thing for us. AOL was a new thing for us.
I remember. Yeah.
Like the texting your phone ain't the same texting you got now, man. Let
Yes.
me tell you, you had to keep punching that button.
Yep. No, I
And then the
agree.
ringtones were all, like, monotone
Yep.
and all
Yep.
that crazy stuff.
And if your dad was on the phone, you couldn't be on the internet and vice
Yes,
versa,
God.
and
Remember Napster and all them other things too?
yeah. Oh,
Yes.
yeah.
Having your own CDs? God, yes, I
Yep.
remember all those things.
That takes me back for sure.
God, yes, and then, the cartoons were different, like, if
Yep.
a lot of people go back and look at a lot of the commercials and stuff too,
Yeah.
like, Jack in the Box had the most, like, controversial commercials I've
Yeah.
ever seen
Oh,
in
I
my
believe
life. I
it.
was like, "This is nuts." And
Yes.
it's like, we thought this was okay as a society
Yeah.
then
Yeah.
versus now where they're trying to censor everything, which I understand what they're trying to do
Sure.
after looking back at it, how
Yep.
bad half these things were,
Yes.
like
Like,
Ren and
oh,
Stimpy and some of those other
yes.
shows that just, like, took everything to the limit.
Yeah,
God.
absolutely.
Back when MTV had music videos? God, now I'm really old now.
Yeah. Oh, that takes me back, watching the top 10 on MTV.
TRL with Carson Daly,
Yeah,
yeah, yeah,
the Carson Daily Show, yes.
right? You tell your son now,
Uh,
like, "Son, they used to have music videos on TV." You just look and you're like, "Okay, mom, that's great.
yeah.
What about Fortnite, or
Yep.
Roblox or all those other
Yes.
ones?" And
Oh, my
it's
son
just
is all about it. I mean, that's all he wants to play is Fortnite. Have to
mhm.
limit that for sure.
It's funny
Yep.
because me and somebody else got in a conversation about that too, about, like,
Yeah.
with kids online, you
Yes.
gotta be very careful. I mean, very careful
Yes.
because there are some people out there that say the craziest things to little kids, and it's just like, yeah. Because wasn't it
Yeah.
with that same scenario, the guy that was 35 that went and shot the 15-year-old kid who was talking trash to him online or whatever, and I'm like, "Oh god."
Yeah. Yeah. Yep.
There there's countless things I've said in the past that I would regret saying now. I
I
do
think
apologize to
everyone
anybody that had to hear them because it was bad.
but that's part of, like, learning and growing as a person. I think that we can all say that, right?
I
And
think so
it's better
completely,
to
like,
be able to say that than be the same shitty person and
oh, yeah.
doing the same shitty stuff, like,
And
um
thinking this past year alone, I've discovered
Mhm.
religion and everything else, and I feel like
Okay.
it's made a major change in my life, and I know a
Yeah.
lot of people don't feel the same way, and that's okay. I agree with that. That's great. I'm not
Yes.
force feeding anything down anybody's
Yes.
throat. Like, it took
Yep.
me a little bit to turn that corner because
Sure.
I had my own stipulations on it, and I've had people
Yes.
like try and force feed it to me, and it
Yep.
just doesn't
Yep.
work like that when you're trying to cram something into people's heads of, oh, it's this, oh, everything you do is a sin. I'm like, I don't
Yeah.
know, like, what you mean, but okay.
Yes. Yep.
And God, I don't know, man. I'm still blown away by this whole
Mm.
conversation because I was like, damn. Like
Yeah.
in my head, I'm thinking, man, what if I was that close? Like, what if that gun was as close
Yeah.
to me? I was like, damn,
Yeah.
that's
Yeah.
crazy.
Well, it's interesting telling my story now almost I mean, I'm being 25 years out, and
Yeah.
there are times where, I mean, I can be taken back to that day, like, if the weather is bad, or maybe I smell or see something that reminds me of it. It
Now,
happens
do
less
you deal with
frequently.
PTSD right now? I would think you would because that
Yeah.
information is fucking horrible.
Yeah. I mean, so, it was very prominent early on. I
Yeah.
would get panic attacks where I would like, people could see it in me where I would freeze and I would just shut down. And I think that I mean, there's almost like stages of grief, and I am no therapist. I don't know this stuff clinically, but there's
Yeah.
almost for me stages of PTSD. And so I had moments of where I could not make sense of what was happening in my brain, and my
Oh, I bet.
brain would I would experience things that I couldn't seem to identify or be able to reason through. Um, thoughts that were foreign to me that I couldn't reconcile or make sense with. And so I went through that phase where I was having these panic attacks. You mentioned nightmares and,
Hmm.
triggers and all of that. And I went through a phase 2, and I've done a little bit of research, but again, not being or having this background, where rage was really a piece of my PTSD. And it would come out in just these waves of just, when your fight or flight is ignited, it was like my fight to the nth degree where I just wanted to rage and throw things and, hit walls and just felt like I had to get some of that emotion out in one way or another. And I think it was just me feeling like, I mean, at Columbine, feeling so incredibly backed into a corner and in such a place of survival and not when you're just stripped. And I think anyone who has been through any type of violence, when you're stripped of your power to that level of just being utterly powerless, there's something that I think is wired into our humanity to have to fight for that back. And so I think like that's where the rage was coming for me, was I was wanting to fight to get my power back in whatever way that looked. And it was just this raw, unpretty emotion.
No, I get
um,
that completely too.
yeah.
My wife deals with PTSD as well, and
Mhm.
I know she'll probably kill me for sharing this, but,
Mm.
I had an incident recently with her where, like, she just turned into autopilot where it wasn't her there anymore.
Yeah.
It's crazy. People think this is like a joke and things like that, but let me tell you firsthand
Mm.
experience, that was not my wife. She had an episode, she got
Yeah.
triggered, and that was it. She hit fight or flight, and
Yep.
that's it. Like, I literally had to fight her off like she was another man because
Yep.
she had gone into a fight mode,
Yep.
and she doesn't
Yep.
remember like 90% of the whole incident at all and things like that.
Mhm.
Luckily, nothing really
Yeah.
too bad happened, but
Yeah.
and it's the first time it's really happened. So I'm not really sure what triggered it. We were having a
Yeah.
disagreement about something, and then
Yep.
something is just set her off, and things like that. It's just crazy because it's like they don't that person on the other side is no longer your loved one anymore.
Yep.
That's somebody in a fight mode now.
Yep.
They're going to do what they have to do, and sometimes it's not a pretty side of this thing. It's
Yeah.
not great, and the great thing about this podcast so far is I've got to meet such
Mm.
great people like yourself and all
Mm.
different people have been through all these different situations of different
Yeah.
things, and it just continues to go. Like I had a guest on my live show on Mondays, named Teddy Colgate. He was a Marine for 22
Mm.
years. Like
Mm.
the emotion this man had
Yeah.
shared when he was talking about his incident where he got his traumatic brain injury
Yeah.
and where the Humvee flipped over and everything else, like you could see the emotion in this man's face, like, and it was
Yeah.
rough. Like I could feel it, just like your story. I could feel it, and it's like, whoa,
Yeah.
like And I was telling people, like, listen, you see the emotion on this man's face? I mean, this is 100% real. Like,
Yeah.
I want y'all to know that Call of Duty is
Yes.
nothing compared to what this is. For a lot of the younger ones, are like, oh yeah, everybody's
Oh
like
my
war,
gosh.
war, war. Look
Yeah.
at what it does to people. It's the
Yes.
like the
It
after effects. I don't think
Yep.
anybody thinks of what's the other effects are.
Yep.
And it's insane. It's like, I talked to somebody today actually before we even got on here, when I was
Mm.
at work, because I work overnights. So
Yeah.
I talked to this gentleman, and he and I were talking about it, and he's an Iraqi veteran, and he was like, I didn't want to go get help for that. And I'm
Yeah.
like, listen, man, I could just tell you from my little experience and what I've heard firsthand encounter. I'm sorry, man. I don't know what it is you've dealt with, but goddamn, I am sorry, bro. I know you don't hear
Yeah.
that enough. I know people don't understand what it's like. And he's like, I've seen things that people shouldn't have seen. I'm like, I
Yep.
100% believe you there, man. And
Yep.
like,
I mean,
I read a book in high school that was called
Yep.
Voices of Vietnam.
Yeah.
And let me tell you, Heidi, it was intense. The
I
things you're
believe
reading,
it.
because these are actual letters of guys that are
Yes.
sending things
Yep.
back. And the
Yep.
guy had to execute somebody at about around our about
Yeah.
around 18 years old. He had to execute him, and he would get to great detail what he was doing
Yeah.
and how he panicked because he was like, "Oh no." And his fight or flight kicked in as well because he was like,
Yes.
"Oh shit, I'm in this situation. I'm in the
Yep.
Viet Cong jungle, man. This guy's making noise. He's bringing it's either
Yes.
me or him at this point." And the guy had to. I
Mm.
think he said the kid was younger than him actually,
Mhm.
and it's crazy. People want all these things, but they don't think of the outcome and the mental effects. And I know when Teddy came back, he said that
Mm.
they had done a test, a psychological test on him, and they didn't even look at his results, which
Yeah.
is scary because it's like you're doing these tests on these people. You've sent them into
Yep.
a war. This guy had an incident. He had a
Mm.
Humvee blow up on him, everything else. And your first thought is, okay, well, I'm not going to look at his other test results and compare the two.
Yeah.
And, involved. And Teddy was like, whoa, hold up. That makes no sense. Like, if you
Yep.
look at my original results versus now, he's like, "What are you doing here? You don't see there's a problem here? I know there's a problem here. My loved ones know there's a problem here. My
Yeah.
wife knows an issue, and it's insane. It
Yep.
really is."
Yep.
So I just yeah,
I mean,
it's
I
crazy.
would love to see a world where that is not the case for people. I think that there is so much brokenness that results from any kind of violence.
Hmm.
And the more that we can get on the other side of that, I think we're going to make progress as, a human species. Like that we need to get past this violence as an answer to solving things. And I don't know what that looks like, but just as you alluded to, the impact of war, the impact of violence, and I think that is one of the reasons why. I chose the work that I do. Having been in a situation like Columbine, where I was at a place of pure and utter survival, and knowing what that feels like, there is a piece of me that can resonate and almost see that experience in different forms and fashions around the world. And so I had mentioned, people lacking access to safe water, right? And that's a survival thing when you don't have one of the core things that's needed for life. And so I feel it's almost empowering. And so I mentioned, like going through periods of rage, to reclaim my power. A part of me reclaiming my power too, I believe, in a more healthy way, is being able to channel, my emotion, heart, feelings, trauma, even into work that is creating a better world for people who are in these survival states. Whether that be lack of access to water, children dying of malnutrition, high newborn mortality, whatever the case may be. I find myself very passionate and heart connected to those issues. I think because of what I experienced and the trauma of what I experienced. And I think there is also a sense for what you said of here's the world as we have it now, and we see it in its broken places and the areas where it undoes people and it makes people, for lack of a better word, monsters. Like, I mean, when you go through violent trauma and what that does to your humanity and how it strips you of even just your own humanness, and then like trying to reclaim that. But I think, being able to do work that is rebuilding our world and envisioning a world that's better, and is solving problems rather than creating them. And so that's why I think what I do is just so important to me, personally, and maybe from a very high level of why I really want to see, just broad change, maybe starting here in this country as it relates to this core issue of mass gun violence, and then that extrapolating out to other parts of our world.
Oh no, I agree 100% with you. There's a major problem here that we need to address now because this is getting out of hand with all these
Yeah.
recent these mass killings and things like that. And it's just too
Yeah.
many lives are being lost over
Yes.
one person's actions, and it's just
Yeah.
crazy. It really is. Like, and we continue to act like, oh no, it's always the guns. Now, how about the person operating the gun too? How about the people that are
Mhm.
getting the guns to these people?
Mm.
Like I think there
Mm.
needs to be more checks and balances in places
Yep.
that what we are as a nation need to start doing. And it's like I understand a lot of people love their guns. That's cool. Okay, that's
Yep.
great. But like we need to have more standards for some of these people that are slipping through the cracks that are causing these kind of problems for everybody else.
Yes.
And
Yep.
it's just ridiculous. It really is. And it's like, and then like every time I sit down with somebody new on this show, it's I learn more and more and more. And it's
Mm.
like I have that thirst for knowledge like you are,
Yeah.
and everything else. And like I said, this whole thing started just out of thought. I was like, hey,
Yeah.
I do know because me and one of my co-hosts, I had another podcast prior to this where I was having a good time, and we had done an episode of men's
Yeah.
mental health, and that's I think what started this whole process was like looking at the statistics. It's just insane.
Yeah.
Like my age range where I'm at, the 39 to 40, right in that 30s, in the 30s to 40 range was the second highest amount to commit suicide. And I
Yeah.
was like, damn, I'm thinking about it. I'm like, damn, that's my age right now. It's like, wow. And on top of all the other things I've been dealing with and stuff like that, I've been avoiding dealing with for a while. And, I just woke up one day and was like, it's time for a change. I need to start doing something now because I don't want to be a statistic.
Yes.
and live in the what if, reality.
Yeah.
My family members and my loved ones all having to deal. What if he didn't do this, or what was he
Yeah.
thinking at that time? And
Yeah.
that's the great thing about this show is that we get different insights, like such as yourself and a couple other
Mhm.
people that have been on here, and things like Teddy's situation, and all different things. And the idea is that mental health shows itself in many different ways. Like I'm
Mm.
sure we know anxiety and all the other things, but there's so many other things that people deal with that I don't think a lot of people realize that goes on, or how it manifests in them versus, like
Yeah.
yourself or I. We all may have different experiences with it, but we all experience something, and it's
Yes.
not talked about enough. It's really not. I
Yes.
mean, you see all these like wonderful little clickbait videos for, oh, it's
Yep.
mental health month, so let's just do a quick video and then it's gone. And it's like, I think that's
Mhm.
the problem, is that people touch on it and then they go away with it, and they're like, okay, well, the
Yep.
hotness is gone, so now we got to go to something else. And it's just like, no, the problem's still there for us. The ones that deal with
Yeah.
this, our issues are still here.
Yep.
And
Yes.
it's crazy too.
Yep.
And it's just like, I feel like that's the problem with social media, the influence on what we're
Mm.
teaching our kids. I know I had a sat down with a guest yesterday. She specializes in children development, and we
Yeah.
were talking about that, about like the things that kids see, is what they start mimicking basically. So like they see other bad behaviors and things that we're doing, and then they mimic it because they think that's what's the right idea. And I think that's the problem. It starts with guns too, is that, depending
Yeah.
on what these kids are seeing, and they're seeing these movies and all these different things, they're
Yes.
getting the wrong idea of how these things actually work and how things
Yeah.
go. And I just don't know what else we can do at this point, but we got to do something because it's just
Yes.
insane. Like we can't
Yeah.
continue to let these things happen, like Sandy Hook
Yes.
and all the other things. All those little kids shouldn't have lost their lives because of one
Yes.
person. And it was just like, and then was it Hidalgo, Texas, where the whole
Mhm.
situation where they were debating what they were doing the whole
Yeah.
time and things like that. It's just insane. It's like people are losing their lives over these decisions, that people
Yes.
are making and things like that. And everybody at the top's like, oh well, this is so tragic. Okay, so then do
Yep.
something about it because it's continuing to happen.
Yep.
a- And you're not doing anything about it. You just want to make it a big little flashy message of, oh, okay, I
Yes.
talked about it for a minute, so now it's going away. No,
Yeah.
it doesn't go
Yeah.
away. It's still there.
Yep.
And then we also need to stop this stupid stigma of everything is mental health. It's not
Yeah.
always a mental health issue. It's the person
Right.
controlling the gun.
Yeah.
And I hate that. I really do, because I deal with my own
Mhm.
issues, and I
Yep.
I start meeting new people that have different things, and it just gets ridiculous because it's like we keep grouping into these categories. We're quick to give it a name to something instead of actually looking at the problem and evaluating what is exactly that it happened, versus sitting there and actually solving an issue instead of kind of sweeping the rug, like, okay, well, we're all done with it, it's okay. Okay, it's gone now. And it's not, it doesn't go away.
Yeah.
Things for you and I, we experience, obviously yourself has been through a traumatic experience, been through a whirlwind of things that happen and stuff like that. And it's still today, it's still an issue for you, as you said, and
Yep.
it's like, one day your son's gonna find out about this, and then you're gonna have to probably explain it to him, like,
Mhm.
and
Mm.
hopefully he's understanding of what happened and realizes that it was terrible.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
it was terrible. The things that you've had to deal with this whole time, and
Yep.
these demons you had to live with, are just it's
Yeah.
just ridiculous.
Yeah.
And stuff like that. And it's just insane.
Yes.
So all
Yeah.
right, before we wrap up,
Yep.
would you like to give everybody some information on where they can find your organization in case they want to
Yeah.
donate or anything, or
Yeah.
learn more about what it is you
Yep.
do?
Yeah, absolutely. And so it's Healing Waters International, and we build water projects predominantly in Latin America and Haiti. Some of the most comprehensive, revolutionary water systems to people that suffer from, I would say, the least amount of access to water. So these are in rural, remote areas of the world, people who have been told that they would never have access to safe water. And so we're at healingwatersinternational.org.
That's awesome. It really is.
Yeah.
And did you want to plug any socials or anything else, or anything? Give
You
shout
can
outs to
find it.
anybody while you're on here?
Sure. I mean, same Healing Waters International on Facebook and Instagram. We're there as well.
Okay. I will
Yeah.
definitely put those the details for this one, because what I do is usually
Thank
chop
you.
this up and I'll put it on my actual
Yeah.
podcast for people that haven't heard this
Love it.
live.
Yep.
So then I'll post all your links and everything else in there. And as always, guys, you
Appreciate
know where to
that.
find me. Pete versus Anxiety on TikTok. I'm also Pete versus Anxiety on Instagram. And it's Pete underscore versus underscore anxiety on Instagram. I do have a Facebook group, Pete versus Anxiety, where I normally post all my lives and everything else I'm going to be doing and things like that. I'm also live Mondays on the Oracle Talk Radio Networks, their Twitch page, my own YouTube page, my Twitch page, and pretty much anywhere else. If I don't have access to that, use Radio 365. I'm on there as well. I'm on there at 10 a.m. Central Standard Time, 11 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. I do have some other things coming down the line. I do have a little special going on 11/11, which just happens to be Veterans Day on that Monday. I'm trying to do a tribute to the troops, so I got something planned in the works there. I have some other bands and stuff that having to sit down and talk to me, or they're supporting this cause too. So we'll have so much of that stuff in case you want to check it out and things like that. So. But anyways, guys, at this time, this wraps up this episode of Pete versus Anxiety. Heidi, thank you so much for coming and telling us that incredible story. I got to say, damn, all I can say is I'm sorry that you had to
Yeah.
experience that. Like,
Mhm.
wow. Had I known this conversation was going to get that deep, I don't know if I
Mhm.
could even be prepared. I mean, wow.
Mhm. Thank
So,
you so much for having me.
oh, I
It
appreciate
really.
it. Like I said, I really do. Sorry about the whole technical difficulties, but
Oh, yeah,
maybe
no worries.
sometime I'll have you on the other live show too, which would be great on
Sure.
Mondays. So we'll definitely have to work something out.
Sounds good. Sounds
So
good.
and as always, guys, as I always tell you, one kind act could obviously save somebody's life. One kind thing, one kind word, saying hello to somebody, even acknowledging somebody can make them feel like their presence. And as always, you know where to find me, Pete versus Anxiety. Have a great one, guys.
I'm Mike.
And I'm Richard. And together, we are the Stay Off My Lawn Show and Podcast.
And together we tackle the important political issues from the week.
We'll also have smart and maybe not so smart audio clips from our elected officials.
And have way too much fun in the process.
So tune in to Stay Off My Lawn every Thursday at 5 p.m. Eastern.
Right here on the Oracle Talk Radio Network.
The Nerd Informer podcast, hosted by Ian Harrowling and Tyler Johnson. An informative look at the world around us and expert discussions on some of the world's greatest mysteries. Tune in Wednesdays at 7 p.m., only on the Oracle Talk Radio Network.